I'd like to introduce our first keynote, Jarob Ortiz. Jarob, you can start your video camera and mic whenever you're ready. This is a really kind of interesting position for those of you who know a bit about photography. This position was once held by Ansel Adams.
That is not correct. It was pitched that way, but it was not held by him. It's just that it's the only large format position in the government.
Okay. So stand corrected. Thank you for correcting me on that one. In any case, Jarob his title is our National Parks and the Digitization of Documentation Photography. So a little bit about Jarob. In 2016, Jarob was selected out of a field of 4,000 applicants to serve as the HDP's large format photographer. Since then, he has produced more than 3,000 large format views, all archived in the Library of Congress and serving as public record. He specializes in architectural and industrial photography and loves the technical challenges associated with recording historic structures. Jarob was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and attended the Milwaukee Area Technical College, earned an associate in applied science and photography, and he now works at D.C. So, Jarob, I'm going to hand this over to you and let you give your awesome presentation.
Thank you, Pete.
Of course.
All right, as Pete just introduced, my name is Jarob. I am the photographer at Heritage Documentation Programs, which is a program within Cultural Resources at the National Park Service. He did do a brief introduction there for me, but there is a little bit more to it. I'll give you a little bit of that background. I did do a little bit of time in the military as electronic warfare specialist, and that's kind of where I did 6 years doing that, and that's kind of where my technical curiosity comes from, I believe, was working with all these different systems and just dealing with schematics all the time. It was something that really intrigued me. And coming into photography was kind of something that just happened real organically in passing, actually. So I had never even picked up a camera until 2009, and it just happened so quick for me. So the fact that I am in the position I am in right now, I am very thankful for this opportunity to be the person that gets to do this work. With that said, I would like to thank also Digital Transitions for asking me to do this presentation. I know that Wayne and I had talked about it for a long time, me doing this, but I felt like we just needed to pump the brakes a little bit, and I needed some time to kind of process everything that's involved with the transition that we're currently making. A little bit about what we'll be talking about here today, an overview, give you an introduction to the program and what it is that we do at Heritage Documentation Programs for those that may not know. Give you a little bit of insight into the traditional methods that we implement for doing documentation photography. And must be said that it is still the only method available to those outside of our office for doing this kind of documentation. We'll discuss the transition into digital photography with the Phase 1 system, some of the pros and cons of both the analog systems we're using and the digital photography. Kind of give you a short preview into the first large-scale project we did. With the Phase 1 system. We'll talk about some of the effects of the improvements in technology and I think we're going to talk about some of these lighting techniques for this work too, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there in regards to this camera system, where people think that because the dynamic range is so phenomenal, it means that you can just go in and take a picture and you got yourself something that's great. We'll discuss it later. It's not that simple. And then I kind of want to talk about some of the new opportunities and possibilities for documentation photography going into the future because of this technology that's coming out now. Like I said, work at the Heritage Documentation Programs. We are out of Washington, D.C. That is a photo from our collection of the main interior building, which is where we work. There's a link to our page right there for you to kind of peruse at your own pleasure. Now, within Heritage Documentation Programs, we have 3 subdivisions. That is the most known one, I would say, out of all 3 programs is the Historic American Building Survey, and that's because it's the oldest out of all of them. The second is the Historic American Engineering Record, and the other one, the last one, which came on board, I believe it was in 2002. It might be 2001. I can't remember off the top of my head. Sorry. Is the Historic American Landscape Survey. So what we're trying to do here is we are basically making records of historic structures, historic processes, and historic landscapes that have been built out. Usually when people hear the landscapes, they always ask, did you photograph Half Dome? No one built Half Dome. So that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking more, I always tell people, think National Mall. That's what we're talking about when we're discussing historical landscapes. All the stuff that we process, all the data that we collect, which are the drawings, the architectural drawings, the large format photographs, and the history that our historians put together for these projects, all of this stuff is stored in what we call the collection, and that's housed at the Library of Congress. They're the ones that are in charge of ushering all that information out to the public. The program was first started in 1933, and it's been administered through NPS, the Library of Congress. And the part that people don't know is this private sector. How is it administered through the private sector? Well, we basically work with a lot of groups outside of the Park Service. Most notably is the American Institute of Architects. We also have ASLA, which is the American Society for Landscape of Architects, and the American Society of Civil Engineers. We work with them closely so that they can help us identify historic sites that may not be on our radar. They also help us when we're talking about developing standards and guidelines and getting feedback and all that. And also through the private sector, since I'm the only government, this is just an example, the only government photographer, I can't photograph everything. So the park regions will, reach out to other photographers and contracts. So we do have partnerships there. The collection consists of over 550,000 measured drawings, large format photographs, and written histories for more than 40,000 historic sites, like I said, all of his documentation serves as a permanent record of the nation's most important historic sites and large-scale objects. And all of the data that we collect is available to the public copyright-free, which is something that a lot of people don't. There's just a lot of people that don't know that it exists, and it'd be great if more people did. So that's why I'm always open for doing these kinds of presentations and discussions, just so that more people know that this resource is available to them. Here are some of the examples of architectural drawings that are done at our program. But we are here to talk about the photography. So right now, as it stands, still we are an analog program, 100% still. We have not made a change, a 100% change over to digital. And the only things that are currently being accepted by the library from our program are the hard negatives. So we are still doing this kind of photography. It's all large format film. We accept 4x5 film, 5x7 film, and 8x10 film. Most of the collection is black and white. Even still to this day, it's all black and white for the most part. I would say for a given project, when I'm out, if let's say I have 50 images, right, that I need to complete, maybe in most cases, 2 of those images will be color. And all of the color images are shot on color transparency film, which presents a number of issues. The types of photographs we are doing for the program are general exterior and contextual views, as you can see here. We are doing exterior detail photographs. General interior photographs, getting a sense for the space inside of places, and the interior details. And we do photos for scale, although this can be, these photos have been debated over time about what their efficacy and accuracy is. It's a discussion we still need to have going forward. But as it stands right now, we still do these images, and they are part of the process. I mean, so for the first 3 years that I was with the Park Service, I worked exclusively with the analog system. So I'm very familiar with it. In fact, before I got on board with the Park Service, I worked a lot with this camera. It's the whole reason why I got into photography, to be quite honest, was to work with this kind of camera. Some of the pros of this system, the technology has been consistent. I mean, it's relatively been consistent for so long. I mean, if you really want to talk about a large format photography, that camera and the way that that's done goes back to the beginning, basically. It's been consistent. You know what it is, you know what you're going to get. The equipment lasts. That's a huge one. I mean, you could buy a camera and it will last you decades as long as you took care of it. The lenses were pretty good too. In fact, I just traded in a lens about 3 weeks ago. When I took it in, they ran the serial number on it and realized that that lens was manufactured in 1960, 65 or something, 66, and it still worked. And I do have a camera in the office, a 5x7 camera that still reads West Germany on it. I mean, the stuff lasts. The one thing I always loved about large format was the fantastic depth of field on the camera. You know, even at f/64, it just really, things looked sharp. They looked great. You didn't really have to worry about it. You could get basically in the zone and everything should be good. And if you really needed to, just peg, you're making guesses, just peg the f-stop all the way. Just tighten it up, and it always turned out great. Not much to worry about. In our workflow, one thing I really love about the large format process is that there's almost no back-end editing. Zero. In fact, as far as the Library of Congress is concerned, the main piece that they're concerned with is the negative. So you don't have to do anything other than just scan the film in, put a general curve on it, and print a card for it that's only going to serve as a reference copy at the Library of Congress. So there's very little back-end work. Now, what that means on the other end is that we are in the field a lot longer doing the photos because the negatives and the transparencies have to be good, right? You need great density throughout, you know, so that if anybody pulls that, you're able to get all the information, extract all the information that you need from that particular image. One thing for us at least, there's a system in place for this. So this, and it's not just the act of taking photos, we're talking about cataloging, you know, database, the way that we interact with outside entities with this system. There is a bureaucratic comfort with it. These standards and guidelines and the way we've done this have worked for us for a long time and have needed very little revision. So people are comfortable with it. I would say that people are also very comfortable with this because it says achievability. Sorry, that's a typo. That is supposed to be archivability. Everyone, when I talk to them about digital, is always concerned about the archivability question surrounding that transition. And, you know, you hear it all the time. It's all about backing up, but there's so many questions surrounding it. And I could go into a whole hour-long discussion about that. But the way I look at it, the library says they can archive it. They're the experts on it. I just take the call from them. They say they can do it, so we're going ahead. That's all I can say. Great resolution in these old cameras. There's no question about it. We're working with monochrome on these old cameras, so you're not worrying about, you know, color data, making sure it's color accurate. You're just worrying about tonality. Can't really, that in my world, that's a huge plus. And besides, I love monochrome. It's wonderful. And one thing that I would say as a pro, but many people would disagree with me, is that it requires some sort of technical understanding in order to do this work correctly. So, you know, it's about bringing all this knowledge into one place and executing. I like that. I know a lot of other people don't. Cons, requires more time in the field, obviously. Requires a heck of a lot more equipment. Oh my gosh, I think I ship about anywhere between 500 to 800 pounds worth of gear when I'm going across the country for some shoots. It's just the nature of the beast. The camera itself is bulky and cumbersome. It's becoming very costly to do this work. We have zero ability to visualize a final image with this. We are not doing digital Polaroids, as some people call them, for this work. We do it all by the numbers, calculations, true zone system photography, all the way down to the T. Everything's calculated in the field. It's all about pre-visualization, and we go with it. And it works. We got a system, it works. There's fewer labs. available for certain things. So I kind of have labs pegged all over the country that do different things better than others. I used to have my own lab, but we moved. And when we moved, we just didn't have space for a lab. So stuff gets sent out now. Big one for me is this, the fewer film emulsions available in the color realm. I think we are down to maybe 3 emulsions of color transparency film. I mean, if you can't document color, then what are you documenting? I mean, you have to have that in your toolbox. But then that said, the color accuracy with the color film, the color accuracy is very difficult to achieve. So, talking about working with contract photographers, there's just fewer of them out there, plain and simple. So we hear from the regions all the time, we can't find anyone. It happens. And the last, at least, is replacing equipment. And we will definitely be discussing this further, because I always thought that the film was going to be what went first, and that does not seem to be what's happening. Lenses. And that lack of availability of lenses, let me just say this. I thought it was going to be film. That forced the transition in the lack of color film. That's what pushed me into this idea that we need to go to digital. Very important. So just in past, once I got hired on with the Park Service, I immediately started the discussions with my supervision about my management about we need to do this. The color film is becoming less available. And I knew that we wanted to work with digital backs. I knew that because we're looking for resolution that's as close to large format film as possible. That's all we care about. Full frame resolution that will get as close to large format. And the reason why it is because in other situations, you will always be able to, well, not always, I shouldn't use absolute terms like that, but you will have an ability to get closer to subject matter and record information. But in this situation, we're out in the field and we have a very finite amount of time to record these structures. Sometimes I'm only given 5 hours to do like a baseline documentation project. That's pretty rough. So you don't really have the opportunity to go through and single out details. Well, with these digital backs, you can take these photos from further back and get a lot more of this information. So I knew that I wanted to work with this, and I reached out to Digital Transitions and told them that, hey, look, we want to do this, and they were great. Everyone at Digital Transitions was great. Doug, Wayne came on out to Washington D.C. and it was great. They showed me the 100 megapixel trichromatic back, and this is where we dove in. And let me tell you, this is quite the rodeo. I thought that this was going to be, at least from the standpoint of capture, I thought that this was going to be relatively straightforward. It has been anything but. One difference here is that in all the other presentations, we're talking about using this back in controlled settings and stuff like that. Studios, doing scanning, things like that. Here, we are in a different situation. Just every single photograph is a different thing, and we're And the whole process and the workflow surrounding it is more complicated than I anticipated. This system has been very educational, and I got a crash course in it immediately because we were right off and running as soon as we got this system in our hands. You know, basically, as soon as the system came into us, we got this proposal to do a civil rights project down in Alabama, recording 21 structures in 3 different cities: Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham. And I think I had to have it done in 29 days. Now, I can tell you right now that if this was on film, this would never have happened. This project could not have happened. There would have been so much time in the field. I would have probably been down in Alabama for at least a couple of years doing this, because it was so difficult. The conditions were difficult and the logistics were just an absolute nightmare. So I got a real big crash course in it, and I just basically learned along the way about what to do and what not to do with this thing. And believe me, there are some photos that made it that we took over the course of this, that I took over the course of this. Not we, this was all me. I was there by myself. That I took that I know are not the best they could be. But we always learn from our mistakes and we make sure to improve. So everything was very critical and always striving to find more information about editing, about capture, and everything like that. Capture 1 in digital transition, or phase 1 in digital transitions, have some great videos out there for helping you along with that. I should say the photo on the left there is the good Lord, the Dexter King Memorial Baptist Church in Montgomery. In the middle, we have the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Selma. That's the dome over the top from inside the sanctuary. And that is the Bethel Baptist Historic Church in Birmingham. That is the church that that church in particular is really amazing to when you think about the history. It was bombed 3 times. So to see that it is in the condition that it's in, which is phenomenal, is impressive. It really is. These are some photos for each of those sites are listed there on each one. So again, those are interior photos from Dexter, interior photographs from Tabernacle, and some interior photos from Bethel, and some exterior photos as well. And the first thing that I noticed with this was the resolution. Here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. When you're in these historic places, there's just so much opportunity to record things that you didn't even know were in front of your face. It happens to me every single time I take photos, like recognizing something after the fact that I didn't even know was there, and it just happens to make its way in. I mean, you look at just here, we got a 4-inch by 5-inch crop, 300 ppi, viewed at 100%. And I mean, we can read sharply what is on that magazine. That's incredible. So, and I mean, with film, you're really at the mercy of what the scanning equipment will allow you. This is just, I mean, this is pretty much straight out. I did edit these photos, obviously, and improve the contrast. And when you improve the contrast, it inherently increases sharpness. But I mean, it's really hard to argue with that sample right there. Like I said before, other thing is latitude. I like this example here because Jet Low, a photographer for hair, he did a photo down here of this exact window way back in '93, and he did it on large format film, and you can see that on the left there. Now, the reason why I like this example is because it was done in almost the exact same conditions. Got to get it done now, with no time for setup. You're there, you just got to do it. Both of these were captured with no additional lighting. Both of these are just straight up forward shots. And as you can see, photo on the left, I understand where Jet's coming from with his photograph here. He wants to expose for those highlights and retain the characteristics of that stained glass. That's the reason why that negative looks the way it does. And I understand that. But over here on the right, we get the best of both worlds. And it's amazing. But with that said, this is where I think a lot of people fall into a trap with this system. They think, okay, we got 15.5 stops. What do I ever need to worry about lighting anymore? So we are going to discuss it a little bit here. I'm going to talk about some of the equipment that I take for lighting in these situations while working with this digital system, the importance of it, and a little bit about technique. So the lighting equipment I use is really just, it's pretty much the same stuff I use for large format. We got battery packs because not everywhere we go has power. I like to use big soft boxes. It just works great for interior lighting. I know a lot of people out there doing this kind of work don't use modifiers like I do. Hey, to each their own, whichever way you can get it done, great. This is the way I'm comfortable with it. So it's what I do. I think we got 6 pro photo heads ranging from 1,000 watt seconds to 250 watt seconds. We're using handheld packs. And as you can see down there in the bottom right, we are still using light meters. I know that that's a thing of the past, but even with digital systems, because we are only doing single capture, no HDR, none of that. These are single capture photographs, all of them. So we still need to establish lighting ratios. As you can see, writing notes and everything. It's really old meets new in our world of photography. Now the importance of lighting. Like I said, we're 15.5 stops. What do I ever need lighting for? Well, so here we go. This is a perfect example. Doing a documentation project on the nuclear ship Savannah. And this room comes up. And we had so many photos on the list. I was like, okay, look, I'm going to do a photo. We're going to do it. I'm like, this camera's got 15.5 stops. Let's just see what it can do. At least we can get a photo. And if we have enough time, we can come back to it. So this is what was produced from just a straightforward photograph. And then I had another situation come up with a gyroscope, and it was in a dark room. And it made something click. And I thought, okay, well, if we turn off all these lights, we can light this like it's a product photo. And the great part about that is we're using all artificial light with zero bias. So that means the colors that we render will be pretty close and better than we could get with these lights on. And that leads us to this. These are the short video clips I made just showing exactly what it was that we're doing here.
All of this setup for a diesel generator. I either love my job or hate myself. Either way, works out great for the Parks areas. Alright, so here it is, the photo setup for this particular shot. It's quite a doozy. It took me about 3.5 hours to set this up, but I think it was worth it. Right here we have the camera set up, which is then tethered over here to the computer. And then as we walk around over here, you can see I have a light set up right over the camera. We have another light set up over here with a big softbox for our lighting ratio at the front. Then when we walk around over this way, we have a light set up around this corner right here, bouncing off, so that we can fill in this area here and give some contrast. We also have a light that I'm using handheld with the small softbox right there, as you can see, so we can fill in this detail which is visible and give a little bit more to the ceiling up there when these lights are turned off. This light over here is also filling in that ceiling detail up there. Then as we walk around over here, I have a small flash set up here to fill in detail on this area. But then there's also another flash tucked in back there, bouncing off that wall, which will fill in detail on these bad boys here, give a little bit of a highlight edge. So that is quite the process to get that all set up.
About 20 minutes.
Yep. Thank you, Pete. And the last video here is dark, but it's just kind of showing you what needs to be done in total darkness. And after all of that, the result is this photo on the left there. So, I mean, technically, Does this have the latitude? Yes. Does it? And I mean, granted, I mean, if I was really in a jam, I'd be so thankful for this. Yes. Like, look at that. I mean, there's no way I could take that photo on large format film with zero lights. That's the thing. Zero lights, but does it really render the subject matter in the way that is true to the object? And I would say that no. I mean, you need to do something where you can see the three-dimensionality. It was so flat in the other photograph. It just looked muddy. You couldn't get the color right because of the overheads. You really, I think, you can't crutch on the technology. And I mean, here over on the right, we got an interior photograph that I did in Washington, D.C. just a couple weeks ago. And I mean, I could probably get away with doing no lighting there, maybe. But I mean, the difference between that couch and those windows, it's a lot. And I have noticed that the situations in which I work, when I start to get to editing, because of the extreme range, if I start pushing things too much in the software, it doesn't look right. It just doesn't work well. So, and like I said, it's all single capture, no HDR. It's kind of, there are some discussions that need to be had. We'll put it that way, about what we do going forward in some things and some exceptions that might need to be made or whatnot. But the improvement to the technology was huge from our standpoint at the Park Service. When I heard about this 150 back and what it was built from, the fact that we were talking about a backside illuminated sensor and everything, I knew exactly what that meant. And there were some other features there that made me jump in all the way on this and figure out a way to get this at the Park Service. This new back is really interesting from my standpoint, because on the trichromatic back, there was no way you could shoot without a white card, in my opinion. There was no way. You had to even it out, and the color bias was just too much. So you had to do it, which was problematic in the situation like you just saw in that video. That was on the trichromatic back. I had to do all that a bunch of times because I had to calibrate that white card with the fall off and everything. There was just no way I could produce a final image without doing that calibration. I've noticed that it's not so bad with the new back, with the 150. It can be, it's there, but it's not like it was. It can be worked with. Live view is a big one. Right here, right as I got this back, had to go out to Idaho and do photos of the Cherry Lane Bridge out there. And right away, I knew that this system was going to be great, because think about it, going out on a bridge like this in these river valleys and trying to carry around a capture station, no, not good. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, I know a lot of people feel comfort with that capture station, but if you're diligent with that back, that screen is good. So, I mean, I'm not shy. I don't take a capture station with me anywhere anymore. I shoot off the back of the camera. I got a workflow there, and it's good. So over the course of working with the digital system, here are some of the pros that I saw for digital. Equipment is readily available. Phenomenal latitude, no matter which way you cut it. It's just fantastic. The color accuracy is awesome, but in the situations that I'm working in, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It really is. The resolution is great. In most cases, I will say this about the lighting: you need less of it. So we're not carrying nearly as much as we normally would on a regular basis. So that's been a big plus. Less time in the field. The system is very versatile, always improving, allows for new opportunities, and my back is feeling much better because it's so much lighter. Everything fits into a backpack, one single backpack. This system right here, the Phase 1 150 with all 4 lenses and the Arca Swiss 6x9 view camera all fits in one backpack. I couldn't ask for much more than that. That's fantastic. Now, some of the cons that I've found so far, we're working with color data. I mean, it's just that simple. The system is so great at picking up color information that no matter what bias is around, it's picking it up. So there are corrections that need to go into it. I have to go in there and do some sort of color correction on almost every single photo in the situation. Thankfully, I do have a background in color separations and doing printing and stuff like that before I was with the Park Service, so I understand it and I know how to get to where I need to get, but it takes a long time. Because there's no reciprocity failure, another con is shorter exposures. And I'll tell you right now, with large format photography, I did not mind the 8-minute exposure. I did not mind the 15-minute exposure. It gave you all the time in the world to fill in everything you needed to fill in with flash. Always getting great interior photos with those long exposures, but it's just not there with digital. So you got to come up with, other solutions. Everything's changing so quickly that it's hard to keep up at times. Thankfully, I think right now with the systems we have, we're in a good place and I don't really have to worry about it for a while unless something really crazy happens. I do know that I want to explore and get into the achromatic back. I think there's a lot of value there for our program going down the line. Ways to record information in certain situations that we wouldn't normally be able to do with exploring different spectrums of light. That is, I think about places like Ellis Island where things have been scribed into the walls and where it's really hard to see in tradition with the visual spectrum. I think that achromatic back would be phenomenal for that. The editing time is outrageous for this. I think it takes me about, just from opening it up to getting it ready to the point to where it's ready for print. We're not talking about entering metadata or renaming files or anything. Just the raw editing file from raw file to output TIFF takes me about 2 hours, 2.5 hours per photo. It's kind of crazy, but can you argue with the results? Digital's costly. We're having major issues with storage. I know everybody knows everybody likes to think that digital is going to be cheaper, and I always tell them, well, you're not thinking about this clearly. It's not. Other cons are, general skepticism, like I talked about with archivability and all that stuff, and integrity. People are worried about objects being removed from photos, and I hear that 100%. I worry about that too, people altering the image and stuff. So we have to come up with a system to check files for that kind of stuff. And one thing that really is crazy about the con of digital photography is that the depth of field issue. And this is the main reason why I think going forward, we in the Park Service need to think about other avenues other than single capture. And it's just, this is the main area because of this depth of field issue. And I think really what we need to do is have a discussion internally about what is more important with the final image down the road. Is the importance of the final image to be true to the limitations of the system you're taking photos with, or is or do we want to focus more on like conveying the actual data of the subject we're recording, right? Because if we limit ourselves based on the equipment we're using from one single capture for the sake of integrity, like the moment in time argument, is that doing justice to the subject that we're trying to record? These are questions that need to be had going forward because of some of these limitations. But and that's the thing here, we're talking about new opportunities, and changing the way that we've looked at documentation photography traditionally, and opening it up in a way that can allow us to look at this stuff in ways that we never have before. One of the big things that I discussed with internally is the panoramic photography that our architects do in some of the photogrammetry work and 3D modeling that they do and all this other stuff. Right now, a lot of that information is not available because there's no way for us to put it out there or anything. Maybe some of that stuff can be included in the collection. Maybe we decide not to. Again, these are all internal discussions, but I'm excited to see where it goes. I really am, because it's going to be a big change. It's going to be a big change. We still got lots of work to do though on it. And where does this currently stand with the Park Service? Like I said, this is all being done internally. We're up to this point, we have basically been dealing with what does the technology do for us? What do we find out in the field, the capture, the editing, trying to basically figure out the workflow for that. Now we're kind of on the backside of that. That phase is done. We know what we want. We know what we're looking for the most part. But we need to work on database stuff, data, digital asset management, storage, all the infrastructure surrounding that. And because we are going from film, none of this stuff has been built. So we're starting from zero. So we are making an exponential leap here from negatives to 150 megapixel files at darn near a gig a piece. It's a crazy change. But we'll see. One of the main things that has really accelerated everything though is the availability of large format lenses. Everybody's like crushed on the idea that large format photography would always be there. I thought the film was going to be the first thing to go, color film, but it was the lenses. The lenses are unavailable for us to purchase as a government entity. They just don't exist. All used inventories are gone, and that's because the Copal shutter system, that guy right there, no longer exists. So even like if you had a broken lens, you could always find a cheap lens, grab the shutter off of there, put it together or whatnot. They're not available, and that's really what's going to be the thing that pushes us forward. If I did have one gripe about the medium format system that's really major for me, which is the reason why we do implement this Sony system, is that we don't have a lens that's wide enough in some spaces to utilize the system everywhere. But I mean, it is what it is, right? You use certain tools for certain situations, and so far so good with it in terms of actual workflow out there. Yeah. And that's that. Thanks everyone for listening to me. for the last bit. I really appreciate it.
Jarob, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. A very interesting technical discussion about transitioning from a photographic film workflow using field and I guess traditional studio cameras to kind of a small field camera with digital back. I never really thought too much about the reciprocity issues and the long exposures relative to popping strobes off, so on and so forth. But that was very, very interesting. So we do have a good few minutes to go to our next presentation, but so we have some time to answer some questions. Love the doggy pictures, by the way.
That was taken right after the XF camera got here because I had to test it and make sure it worked. So he was a great little model for that.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So questions. First one. Okay. This is from Mitro. Wow. Where do they get the film and the costs for the film?
So the film is available at B&H or Adorama, but it is very expensive. It's gotten even more expensive lately. From what I understand, the recent tariffs that have been imposed have really done a number. I think you can see it across the photographic industry, but I think 25 sheets of 5x7 are close. I think it's $80 right now for 25 sheets. Color transparency film is outrageous too right now. I think that's about $100 for 20 shots. 4x5 was good for a while. I was liking that because it was about $1 a sheet. Those days are gone. It's recently jumped up to, I think you can get it for like $180 for 100 sheets of it or something. It's all going up, but it's available. It's available.
Gotcha. Okay. Question from Brendan. Are these using 90 millimeter lenses or wider? I'm not quite sure exactly what you're referencing in terms of what shot.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about the phase 1 system, I mean, I typically use the 32 for the most part, but on the old 5x7 camera, my favorite was the 90 for the wide angle lens. You could get away with the 72 if you weren't shifting at all. I mean, you were right at the edge. 90, but really my favorite lens for the old system was 120. 120 on the phase system. I really like the 40 and the 50, but my favorite lens for the system we're using now is the 90 millimeter super wide. I mean, that thing is amazing. That is a great lens in terms of performance, sharpness, contrast. I have seen few lenses like that. The Rodenstock lens.
Nice. All right, let's get some more questions going. Otherwise, I have a few I've been wanting to ask you myself. When, I guess someone wants your job. When are you retiring?
We'll see how this transition goes to digital. It feels like it's aging me very quickly.
Wait a second. I thought you said it's kind of saving your back.
Yeah, my back it was really rough with the 5x7, especially when you're photographing ships and everything and you're climbing like down into the bowels on a ladder and then you're carrying a 5x7 camera over your shoulder, like lowering it down on a rope or something.
Yep. Here comes another interesting question from Jennifer. I remember having to learn how to do this in my 405 class in college many decades ago. Were all the lights stationary, or did you also do a bit of light painting?
Well, that's essentially what I do. Is I do use light painting. So the lighting, that's the ones that you see on the stands. There's lights that are on the stands. That's the base lighting. This is like okay, this is where I want my light sources to come from, right? Like these are the ones that I really want to have the most impact. But then in between that, I have flashes that I handheld and kind of just delicately paint in the shadow areas around those main lights. And yeah, so it's light painting to some degree. And really that's how I learned how to do photography, was going to abandoned buildings in Milwaukee and Chicago and Detroit, when I first started doing photography. And my brother did a lot of light painting and stuff, but on digital. And then I would see that visual of what light was doing, and then I could take it and then, pre-visualize it on the film.
Mm-hmm. This is from Stacy. Are you doing multi-pops for each light fixture?
For each light fixture.
Yeah, because I think in the video that you showed where you're in the diesel or the engine room showing the diesel, and you were kind of kicking off the flash, then change channel and kicking off another flash. Were those multi-pops for getting the light ratios right, or how'd you do that?
I mean, let me see this. Let me think about this really quick. This is, okay, so, I mean, pretty much every single light has to be, every single head that I set up has to be multi-pop for the most part. Now, when I'm out and I'm using natural light in conjunction with my ambient exposure, typically most times I can get away with just doing one pop here and there. And especially since I got 1,000, watt-second heads at my disposal, with a few other ones that are even more so than that. There's a few old packs from back in the day that reside in our secret chamber of old equipment that reach, I think, 1,600 watt seconds that are handheld things. So sometimes I can get away with just doing one pop, but for multi-pop is really good for doing architectural interiors. Multi-pop gets you where you need to be.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Here's another question from Tom. I guess this is kind of about making longer exposures as you would with reciprocity failure problems with film. Have you tried using ND filters? So
I have tried using ND filters, but here's the thing that's crazy, right? Like, you got an ND filter, you're going to kick down you're going to extend the length of the exposure, but you're also going to be reducing the amount of power your flash has. And do the number of stops that you're actually gaining from, in terms of the number of stops you're gaining in time, does it really pay off for the amount of power you're losing from your flash? Like, will those two things come together where you're going to have an adequate amount of time to do double the flashes that you normally calculated? So, it's all situational, but for the most part in these situations, I really don't use ND filters too much. I'd say I use them for the sake of doing flash photography. I'd say I use them almost never compared to without.
Okay, well, you got another one coming here. Do you have any pushing, pulling? Oh, I'm sorry. This is from Manuel. Do you have any pushing? Do you do any pushing or pulling when you're using your film?
Almost every single photograph that I take with the Park Service, because we're looking at detail and the nature of what it is that we're photographing, almost every single photograph I take is normal -2, normal -3. Almost every single photograph. It's just the nature of the beast. I think in my entire 6 years with the Park Service so far, I think I have pushed 2 sheets of film. I think that's it. It's just we're even if the situation is flat and I want to achieve dynamic range 5 stops, I'll tell you what, I'm going to shoot it flat for the sake of we know that we got the detail. And then I will work. If I really wanted to have like super pristine contrast on the back end, then at least I have the information to work with on the back end. It's really more about recording data with this position than it is about being artistic, so to speak. But it doesn't mean they can't exist together. And there's opportunity to do that. But when it comes down to it, we need to remember there is a mission, and it is to record data first.
Gotcha. Okay, this is from Doug. You have a tremendous amount of experience with film processing labs across the country. Can you shout out your favorite ones or two for any of our clients that may need them?
So I'm going to be kind of partial here. There's a great lab in Milwaukee that I used. I learned from these fellows. It was Tom Fritz and Fred Fisher. They run a great lab. Well, Fred retired now, but Tom is still there. They run a great lab there. It's called Tom Fritz Studios. They're very particular. They do a lot of work for the Harley-Davidson Museum. They do a lot of work for the Pabst Mansion and stuff like that. So they have a full-scale operation there. They're doing, copy work and everything, but they run a great lab. Also, I like Underdog Film Labs. It's a newer lab out in Oakland area. They kind of broke away from the main lab in San Francisco and established their own thing over in Oakland. I think they've only started up. They started right when the pandemic started. So I'm glad to see they're still with us. I'm glad to see they're still here because they're a great group of people over there. I really enjoy talking to them.
All right, we only have time for a couple more questions, and we're going to start pushing them more towards the breakout session. We have a question here from one of our speakers. I'm going to read that before the one that popped up. This comes from Franz, who's going to give a talk about basic color and that implementation. Can you see using drones with virtual reality glasses in the near future?
So the drone topic, I mean, it's a tough subject because the parks don't like drones. The parks do not want them around, and they really don't have very many avenues for us to use them, even as permanent employees. In fact, it's more difficult for myself to use a drone than it is for us to hire a contractor to come out and do this. So even if I had my license and everything, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I need to do to do it. I definitely see using drones. I see the value in it, absolutely 100%, and using them, but it's going to be difficult. I think we kind of need to get over the initial hurdle first of getting to digital before we start thinking about these super highly specialized things.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to throw one of my questions at you because I've been fielding everyone else's, and I'm an old view camera shooter myself. I shot a field camera for decades and just like the process. And I'm just kind of curious about your experience going from a ground glass over to tethered to a computer, and now you're using the digital back as your kind of, I guess, loop on ground glass or whatever you need it for to inspect your exposure and that kind of stuff. How long did it take you to kind of make that jump to do that, where you felt very, I would say confident would be the word, that you were getting what you wanted?
I don't know if to be honest, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel pretty comfortable with it right away because I came up learning both digital and analog at the exact same time. I didn't really, to be honest, I didn't like the tethered. Anything that is like with being tethered to the computer, I absolutely did not like, just because it was such a hassle. Dropping in and out, because you see these areas, I mean, climbing around in these tight spots, covered in that video, I was covered head to toe in hydraulic fluid, just disgusting. I smelled like gasoline for 2 weeks after. carrying around this computer and doing all this stuff and trying to move around these tight spaces, that was the worst of it. That was the hardest thing to deal with. I'm glad that those days are done. But I mean, I felt pretty comfortable, but because of the finicky nature of the whole system, I realized that my comfort sometimes gets me into trouble.
Okay.
Even like a half a millimeter of a movement on accident on something and everything is completely thrown off. So
Gotcha.
yeah, I should probably be a little bit more worried.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, anyway, I'd love to continue kind of talk to you about view cameras and more of this stuff, but we do need to move along here a little bit.
Could I just say one thing?
Please.
I just wanted to say one thing, that through this whole transition, I could not, like, working with Wayne, Doug, and, well, when Spencer was working there too, I really worked with him close and talked to him. Working with Doug and Wayne through this has been amazing. The way that they interacted with me and dealing with it, getting me information and making me feel comfortable with the whole process of doing this. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. Just wanted to say that really quick.
Thank you very much for saying that. It's always great to hear.